Chapter 14:19. Gradually, the speed at which Han Shiling's hands moved became faster and faster. The golden light in her hands became denser and denser, sparkling with a dazzling and enchanting light. However, what everyone cared about was not how beautiful the light was. What they felt was the power that made their hearts palpitate. This power was even more shocking than when Han Shiling had displayed the 9 dark phoenix finger. Golden wheel crescent moon. Han Shiling shouted coldly. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with a vicious light as she stared fixedly at Bailey Hongzhuang. It was as if she wanted to annihilate Bailey Hongzhuang along with the golden wheel crescent moon. Under the crowd's astonished gazes, a golden crescent moon slowly rose from behind Han Shiling and appeared in midair. Even the radiance of the sun seemed to be blocked by this crescent moon. It was different from the usual gentleness of the moon. The crescent moon that Han Shiling had condensed was even sharper and more threatening, causing people to tremble in fear. Han Shiling's face was extremely pale. This golden wheel crescent moon was a martial technique that she had only recently mastered. Its power was extremely powerful. However, with her current cultivation, she was unable to fully display the power of this golden wheel crescent moon. She could only display a portion of its power. However, even so, it was enough. Bailey Hongzhuang would definitely regret making her an enemy. However, this ending was destined to be irreversible. When Han Shiling was displaying her martial technique, Bailey Hongzhuang was also displaying her martial technique rapidly. The crowd stared in shock at the dazzling speed at which Bailey Hongzhuang was condensing her hand seals. They could only see an aqua-blue seal that constantly deepened and changed. However, they could not see how Bailey Hongzhuang was moving. Under such a high frequency of condensation, Bailey Hongzhuang's fair and thin hand began to show traces of blood. This was because the speed of condensation was too fast. Looking at this scene, the crowd was secretly speechless. It was their first time witnessing such a scene when forming a seal. However, just from the complexity of the hand seals, everyone could tell that this move of hers was not simple. Suddenly, Bailey Hongzhuang's hand seals changed, and a scalp-numbing aura spread out. Immediately after, a black lotus flower appeared behind Bailey Hongzhuang. The black demonic lotus spun slowly and emitted a mysterious and profound power. The black demonic lotus rotated and slowly opened. A trace of red appeared in the center of the black demonic lotus. The intertwining of black and red revealed an indescribable magic. A faint smell of blood quietly spread, causing people to think of Bailey Hongzhuang's hand that was dripping with blood. An energy that was not the slightest bit weaker than the golden wheel mysterious moon swept out, instantly dyeing the golden sky with a touch of black. The originally bright sky was now occupied by two colors, black and gold. No one was willing to give way to the other. High Heaven Devil Lotus. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze was cold. Her beautiful face was as pale as paper, which made her pair of pitch-black eyes seem even more bottomless. Feeling the martial technique that Bailey Hongzhuang was displaying, Han Shiling's expression changed a little. This was because she could feel the shocking energy contained in Bailey Hongzhuang's martial technique. Her cold almond eyes were filled with doubt. She had never heard of this High Heaven Devil Lotus before. It should not be a martial technique of Tiangang sect. In this way, she could not figure it out. Chapter 14:20. This kind of martial skill, just from its power, could be judged that its power was definitely not ordinary. You know, it was not easy for her to get the golden wheel profound moon. The higher the level of the martial skill, the more difficult it was to practice, and it was not easy to get it. Even if there were a lot of martial skills in Tiangang sect, if you wanted to practice high-level martial skills, you also needed to have a certain level of authority. Even with the identity of Di Baichen, some of the extremely great martial skills could not be leaked to cultivators outside the sect. Where did Bailey Hongzhuang get her hands on this level of martial arts? The level of the previous Azure Flame Holy Palm was already not low. She thought that Bailey Hongzhuang had used her strongest move, but she did not expect that there was a stronger move. She had previously learned about the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang. She was just an unloved young lady of a small dynasty. It was too strange for her to have this level of martial skill. Suddenly, Han Shiling's eyes lit up. Maybe it was Mo Yunjue who gave it to Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang took out a few qi recovery pills and quickly put them into her mouth. She had forcibly displayed this move, Ling Tian Demon Lotus. All the power in her body was almost drained and dried up. After Xia Jiqing and the others saw Bailey Hongzhuang display a martial skill that they had never seen before, their eyes were filled with amazement. They never knew when Bailey Hongzhuang had practiced this martial skill. Just by looking at the power of this martial skill, they could understand that it was definitely not easy to practice it. Speaking of which, Bailey Hongzhuang's background was more than they imagined. However, after a short surprise, Xia Jiqing and the others were more worried about the safety of Bailey Hongzhuang. Han Shiling's move seemed to be extremely simple. After this collision, the final result was really unpredictable. Boss won't be in danger? Xia Jiqing's eyes were filled with worry. She had successfully killed a cultivator with the help of Bai Junyu. Bai Junyu frowned as he looked at the confrontation between Bailey Hongzhuang and Han Shiling. He was unable to determine the outcome of such a fierce battle. Bai Junyu immediately noticed that Mo Yunjue was also paying attention to the battle between Bailey Hongzhuang and Han Shiling. With Mo Yunjue's strength, he shouldn't let anything happen to Hongzhuang, Bai Junyu said. Hearing this, Xia Jiqing also looked at Mo Yunjue. Sure enough, Mo Yunjue was frowning at this scene. Just from the way he stood, it was clear that Mo Yunjue was ready to act. The moment something happened to Boss, Missouri Yunjue would definitely take action. Seeing this, Xia Jiqing was relieved a little. At least, Mo Yunjue was stronger than them. Bailey Hongzhuang die. Han Shiling snorted coldly. With a thought, the Black Moon attacked Bailey Hongzhuang fiercely. Damn it, it's you. Bailey Hongzhuang also did not retreat. With a wave of her hand, the Demon Lotus flew towards the Black Moon. Boom! A thunderous sound resounded through the sky, and an extremely terrible Yuanli storm formed in the air. The originally bright sky became dark at the moment of the collision. The space of the whole world seemed to be completely distorted at this moment. The earth-shaking power made people tremble. Chapter 1421. The cultivators from the Qinrun Empire and the Myriad Cloud Empire, who were originally fighting, stopped after seeing such a terrifying energy collision and quickly retreated. Once this kind of energy raged, the power was extremely powerful. None of them wanted to be affected by such an aftermath, so they could only stop. However, after seeing the terrifying battle fluctuations of Bailey Hongzhuang and Han Shiling, everyone didn't know what to say. The energy that erupted from the two women was so amazing. As a cultivator of the Tiangang sect, Han Shiling's combat power was not enough to surprise people. But in the end, who was this Bailey Hongzhuang? Her attack power was actually so strong, it was simply too amazing. Since when did the cultivators from a medium-sized empire become so powerful? This kind of combat power is very amazing even in a large empire. Fortunately, we didn't become enemies with them. In the future, we have to be careful when we encounter a team from a medium-sized empire. If we encounter a monster with such a powerful combat power, then we are really unlucky. Feeling the crazy and raging energy, everyone cursed in their hearts. In comparison, the combat power of some large empires was not so terrifying. Bailey Hongzhuang is actually so powerful. Bailey Haoxuan was completely dumbfounded. The trash that was bullied by him all day long had now become so powerful. Even he couldn't help but applaud her combat power. If Bailey Hongzhuang was allowed to continue to develop, she might really become a famous figure in the Shengxian continent in the future. Maybe, after the assessment competition, she would become a cultivator of a sect. At that time, the gap between them would really be an insurmountable gap. She is no longer the Bailey Hongzhuang of the past. After this assessment competition, we probably won't see her again. Xianyuan Huan's voice was filled with faint emotion and melancholy. A genius like Bailey Hongzhuang was not someone that could be retained by Feng Bo Empire. The stupidest thing he had done in his life was to give up on Bailey Hongzhuang. Hearing Xianyuan Huan's words, Bailey Haoxuan was slightly taken aback, but he immediately acquiesced. The general's estate treated Bailey Hongzhuang so badly. With Bailey Hongzhuang's current ability, it was indeed possible for her not to return. At this moment, he finally understood why his father was so lonely when Bailey Hongzhuang left. Thinking about it, it was indeed a pity for the general's residence to lose such a great helper. Bailey Hongzhuang might die in this battle. Bailey Haoxuan's eyes flashed with uncertainty. Today's situation was already very obvious. Between Bailey Hongzhuang and Han Xiling, one of them must die. It was just that no one was sure who would die in the end. Xianyuan Huan clenched his fists and stared at the raging darkness in front of him. The battle between Bailey Hongzhuang and Han Xiling was also beyond Mo Yunjue's expectations. He did not expect that the two women would erupt with such terrifying power in the end. In this darkness, it was not easy for him to find Bailey Hongzhuang's location. What's more, the center of the storm was a place that no one dared to approach. The energy raged, the storm swept, and everyone even felt that the earth was shaking. Chapter 1422. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated, the energy gradually calmed down, and the darkness that was shrouded in energy gradually regained its brightness in everyone's sight. However, after seeing the destruction in front of them, everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Hiss, in their line of sight, the originally flat ground had become a mess, and in the center of the energy explosion, there was a huge deep pit. Around the deep pit, cracks snaked out and the ground cracked. The shape was terrifying. The surrounding trees had long been reduced to dust. In fact, even the restriction was showing signs of shattering. Such a terrible destructive power was not seen much on ordinary days. After seeing it at this moment, everyone could not suppress the shock in their hearts. Compared to the other onlookers who were sighing at the power of this destructive power, the cultivators of the Tiangang dynasty had already looked for Bailey Hongzhuang for the first time. They could feel the amazing energy just from the periphery of the raging energy. So how terrifying was Bailey Hongzhuang in the center of the energy explosion? However, Xia Jiqing and the others glanced around and did not find the figure of Bailey Hongzhuang at all. Even the figure of Mo Yunjue had disappeared. Boss. Xia Jiqing immediately walked forward, her pretty face full of worry, and her mouth kept calling the name of Bailey Hongzhuang. She only felt that her heart was squeezed, and she couldn't imagine what they would do if something happened to the boss. Boss. Yuan Xiaoman and Yuan Jixin also called Bailey Hongzhuang nearby. They believed that Bailey Hongzhuang must be here. Hongzhuang. Gong Shaoqing, Dongfangyu, and Bai Junyu's eyes were also full of worry and tension, and they were only praying that Bailey Hongzhuang would not have an accident. The cultivators in Han Xiling's team were also looking for the existence of Han Xiling, but compared to the previous 8-people team, there were only 3 people left. With the strength of Xia Jiqing and the others, they could completely solve these 3 cultivators together. However, in this situation, they were not in the mood to care about these 3 people. Finding Hongzhuang was the most important thing. However, no matter how Xia Jiqing and the others shouted, there was no response. Xia Jiqing's eyes had become red, and a touch of crystal quietly filled her eyes. No, nothing will happen to boss. Gong Shaoqing and the others were also frantically searching, digging into the ground. If they were buried under the yellow sand, it would not be long before they died. The surrounding cultivators were filled with emotions after witnessing this scene. It seems that both Han Xiling and Bailey Hongzhuang have perished. With such a terrifying collision of energy, you can imagine how powerful the power of the central zone was. These two people were so young and their strength was so great. To think that they fell just like that, it really makes one sigh. Dong Hongyun and Pan Zimo looked at each other. They didn't know what to do in this situation. Something happened to Han Shiling, you're finished. Dong Hongyun looked at Pan Zimo coldly. Although this matter was a conflict between Han Shiling and Bailey Hongzhuang, it was still related to them. Pan Zimo looked at Dong Hongyun angrily. You only know that Han Shiling is a disciple of Tiangangzong, but you don't know that Bailey Hongzhuang is the wife of the Tiangangzong's young lord. Whether it's you or me, you think about it. Chapter 14:23. After Pan Zimo began to move, Dong Hongyun looked at Pan Zimo's back. His mind kept thinking about what Pan Zimo had said before, and his expression gradually changed. This was really unbelievable. Dong Hongyun's first thought was that Pan Zimo was lying to him. However, thinking of Pan Zimo's changing expression and the confidence he showed when talking to him, he faintly felt that what Pan Zimo said was true. Because Pan Zimo, who wanted to become a disciple of Tiangang sect, could only restore his spirit with this reason. If Bailey Hongzhuang was really the wife of the young lord of Tiangang sect, then wouldn't he be done for? At the thought of this, Dong Hongyun's face also became pale. Even if Han Shiling's position in Tiangang sect was high, it could not be higher than the position of the young lord's wife. The cultivators of the Qin-run dynasty looked at Dong Hongyun's constantly changing face, and their eyes showed doubts. They didn't know what Pan Zimo said to Dong Hongyun that could make Dong Hongyun's face change. Dong Hongyun finally believed what Pan Zimo said, and immediately waved his hand and said, "Quick, let's find Bailey Hongzhuang together." Hearing this, the cultivators of the Qin-run dynasty couldn't help but ask, "Captain, if we find Bailey Hongzhuang, are we going to kill her?" "Kill your head. Why don't you kill yourself?" Dong Hongyun said angrily, "Hurry up and find Bailey Hongzhuang, so that you don't have to apologize." As soon as these words came out, the cultivators of the Qin-run dynasty were stunned. They wanted to ask the reason, but Dong Hongyun had already started to move. Seeing this, they didn't dare to delay any longer and immediately started to search. "Boss!" Xia Jiqing kept shouting, and kept telling herself that nothing would happen to the boss. She held back the tears in her eyes and didn't let them fall. At this moment, there was some movement on the ground not far from Xia Jiqing. Seeing this, Xia Jiqing immediately rushed over, and her hands kept digging the soil. "Boss, is that you?" Xia Jiqing's face was red, and her hands were trembling because of nervousness. When she dug into the soil, her nails overflowed with blood, but she didn't seem to feel it at all. After Gong Shaoqing and the others saw Xia Jiqing's actions, they also came to help. Under the joint efforts of everyone, a hand finally appeared in everyone's sight. However, this hand did not belong to Bailey Hongzhuang. It was a man's hand. After seeing the man's hand, Xia Jiqing and the others were stunned for a moment. Yuan Shao Man immediately reacted and said, "This must be young Master Mo." Cough cough. Mo Yunjue kept fiddling with the dirt on his head and finally appeared in front of everyone. "Young Master Mo, do you know where boss is?" Ignoring Mo Yunjue's current situation, Xia Jiqing immediately asked about Bailey Hongzhuang's situation. "I'm here." Bailey Hongzhuang's voice followed, and Xia Jiqing and the others were ecstatic. This at least proved that the boss was fine. However, this voice seemed to come from Mo Yunjue's side. Chi. Mo Yunjue's figure swept and his whole person directly jumped out of the ground. The soil on top of his head was too thick, and it was not easy for him to exert his strength. After Mo Yunjue jumped out of the deep pit, he immediately went down. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure also appeared in front of everyone. Boss. Chapter 14:24. They saw that Mo Yunjue's black robe was covered with dust at the moment. Compared to his handsome appearance before, the current Mo Yunjue was a bit embarrassed. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was pale, and her clothes were stained with blood, but the dust on her body was much less than Mo Yunjue's. After seeing this scene, everyone quickly understood. Before, it was Mo Yunjue who blocked Bailey Hongzhuang's body, so Bailey Hongzhuang's body was relatively clean. Bai Junyu and the others looked at Mo Yunjue with a bit of complexity. Before, they had noticed that Mo Yunjue had been paying attention to Bailey Hongzhuang's battle, ready to protect her at any time. They didn't expect that after the battle broke out, Mo Yunjue really protected Bailey Hongzhuang. "Boss, how are you? I was scared to death just now." Xia Jiqing's voice revealed a bit of a sob. She had never been so nervous. After not getting the news of the boss, she only felt that her whole person didn't know how to think. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head slightly. "Although I suffered some injuries, the injuries are not too serious." Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xia Jiqing and the others looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in disbelief. Just now, with such a tyrannical energy clash, how could Bailey Hongzhuang not be injured? However, Bailey Hongzhuang was telling the truth. The injuries on her body were all caused when she dealt with Han Shiling's 9 Phoenix finger. Later, when she used the Ling Tian Demon Lotus, all the Yuan Qi in her body was exhausted, so she was not injured. At that time, she only felt darkness in front of her, and all the sand flew up. Then, she fell into an embrace. Thinking of this, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately looked at Mo Yunjue. "Mo Yunjue, how are your injuries?" She was not injured because Mo Yunjue protected her. With such a terrifying energy impact, presumably Mo Yunjue's injuries were also very serious. With Bailey Hongzhuang's voice falling, the eyes of the Tiangang dynasty's cultivators fell on Mo Yunjue, and their eyes showed the same color of worry. "Young Master Mo, where are you injured?" Mo Yunjue waved his hand slightly. "It's nothing." Hearing this, everyone looked at Mo Yunjue with a slightly surprised look. Could it be that Mo Yunjue's strength was strong enough, so the impact just now did not have much impact on him? What's more, from Mo Yunjue's calm look, they couldn't see the slightest difference in the slightest. "Young Master Mo, Miss Bailey, it's great that you're all right." Pan Zimo hurried over after seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang and Mo Yunjue were safe and sound. His handsome face was filled with a joyful smile. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "Thank you for your concern." When the other cultivators saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and Mo Yunjue were safe and sound, their hearts were also filled with sorrow. "I didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to be so powerful. Han Shiling still hasn't been found. It seems that Bailey Hongzhuang has won this battle. Tiangang Sec's Han Shiling actually couldn't defeat Bailey Hongzhuang. In the future, I must find out what kind of person Bailey Hongzhuang is." This battle was really impressive. The result was also unexpected. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest who were so happy, the 3 cultivators in Han Shiling's team felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar at this moment. Who would have thought that Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest were so powerful, and the 2 demonic beasts that suddenly appeared were also extremely powerful. Chapter 1425. Pan Zimo placed a hand on Mo Yunjue's shoulder. "Young Master Mo, you're really amazing. You've done a great job as her bodyguard." However, when Pan Zimo's hand came into contact with Mo Yunjue's back, he felt a burst of pain, and his brows furrowed. Pan Zimo retracted his hand, only to discover that his hand was covered in blood. Gong Shaoqing and the rest who were originally in a good mood were stunned when they saw this scene. Upon closer inspection, they discovered that Mo Yunjue's back was covered in blood, but because he was wearing a black brocade robe, it was not obvious. "Mo Yunjue, you're injured." Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes narrowed, and she quickly walked over to Mo Yunjue's side, only to discover that Mo Yunjue's back was stained red with blood. Previously, Mo Yunjue had used his body to protect her, and his back must have suffered a very serious injury. Mo Yunjue waved his hand, his expression as cheerful as ever. "It's nothing, such a small injury won't kill me." "Young Master Mo, your injuries are so serious, why aren't you applying medicine?" Yuan Xiaoman was extremely worried after regaining her senses. Such a serious injury, and Mo Yunjue was still saying that it was a small injury? Looking at Mo Yunjue in such a state, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but recall the scene when she had first met Mo Yunjue. At that time, Mo Yunjue had also suffered a very serious injury, and if he had not met her, he would not have been able to keep his life. However, even under such intense pain, Mo Yunjue's face was still filled with an indifferent smile, as if the person who was injured was not him. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly took out a healing pill and fed it to Mo Yunjue. Before she had taken part in the assessment, Di Beichen had given her a few more precious pills. Facing such a Mo Yunjue, she felt a little helpless, and her heart was filled with guilt and gratitude. She should have been the one to bear these injuries, but Mo Yunjue had helped her bear them. If Mo Yunjue had not protected her at the critical moment, she would have been in a terrible situation. After all, Han Shiling was an extremely famous cultivator in Tiangang sect. His combat power was also extremely strong. It was more difficult to deal with him than she had imagined. Mo Yunjue stared intently at Bailey Hongzhuang. When he saw the worry in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes, a hint of a smile appeared in his deep, handsome eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang took out her own medicine and said to Dongfang Yu, "Sprinkle this medicine on his wound." As a cultivator, it was unavoidable for them to get injured. Thus, golden sore ointment was especially important. This was the Bailey family's famous golden sore ointment. It was extremely effective and could stop the bleeding immediately. Dongfang Yu nodded slightly and directed Mo Yunjue to take off his clothes. When everyone saw Mo Yunjue's muscular upper body, they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. On Mo Yunjue's body, the scars were especially eye-catching. On his chest, there was a terrifying and winding wound that almost split his body into two. Even Gong Shaoqing and the others couldn't help but exclaim after seeing this scene. With so many injuries, what exactly did Mo Yunjue go through? Even the mercenaries who lived a life of licking blood from the edge of the blade wouldn't have as many scars as Mo Yunjue. Dongfang Yu didn't delay any longer and immediately sprinkled the golden sore ointment on Mo Yunjue's injured back. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice rang out, "It will hurt a little when applying the golden sore ointment, but the effect is very good." Chapter 1426. After seeing Mo Yunjue's strong endurance, everyone could not help but admire him. Just by looking at the scars on Mo Yunjue's body, Mo Yunjue had already become an iron-blooded man in their hearts. Bailey Hongzhuang checked the injuries on Mo Yunjue's back and saw that Mo Yunjue's back was covered in blood. She was afraid that there would be another deep scar. Fortunately, Mo Yunjue had used his elemental energy to protect his body, so it was not fatal. However, such a serious injury would require a period of time to completely recover. "Thank you." Bailey Hongzhuang gazed at Mo Yunjue, her clear eyes filled with sincerity and gratitude. Mo Yunjue laughed lightly. "You saved my life back then, now I'm saving yours. You don't have to take it to heart." Looking at Mo Yunjue's nonchalant look, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart was touched. This was not the first time Mo Yunjue had said this to her. If they really counted, she had saved him back then, and he had told her about Baisher's identity, so they were even. Later on, when she was attacked by an assassin, Mo Yunjue had appeared and helped her once. In the Qing dynasty, when they had a conflict in the restaurant, Mo Yunjue had helped her once again. During the inter-school competition, Missouri Yunjue had stood up and helped her as well. And now, Mo Yunjue had helped her once again. She already owed Mo Yunjue too much. However, Bailey Hongzhuang did not say all this out loud. She just quickly helped Mo Yunjue treat his wounds. If she did not treat and bandage it now, once the wound became infected, it would become worse. And while Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were concerned about Mo Yunjue's injuries, Han Shiling's team had also found Han Shiling. However, they only found Han Shiling's body. No matter how they tried to call out to Han Shiling still stopped breathing. Sun Yangbing looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in disbelief. He could not believe that Bailey Hongzhuang had really killed Han Xiling with her own strength. There was clearly a two-stage difference in strength between them, and Han Xiling's combat power was far beyond that of an ordinary cultivator. Under such circumstances, Han Xiling still lost. How strong was Bailey Hongzhuang's talent? At this moment, Sun Yangbing could not help but think of Di Beichen. Perhaps, from the beginning to the end, Di Beichen's judgment had never been wrong. Bailey Hongzhuang, the great elder knows that you've killed Bailey Hongzhuang. He will never let you off. Sun Yangbing stared coldly at Bailey Hongzhuang. Long before they had taken part in the assessment, the great elder had instructed them to protect Han Xiling. If anything happened to Han Xiling, they would be completely finished. Now that Han Xiling had fallen, their future was hopeless. Seeing that Sun Yangbing still dared to hoot at a time like this, Yuan Zhixin and the others' faces turned cold, and they immediately rose to their feet. They wanted to capture Sun Yangbing and the others in one fell swoop and not leave a single one alive. No matter how the great elder believed that Bailey Hongzhuang had killed Han Xiling, as long as there was no evidence, everything would be meaningless. Hence, they must not leave a single witness behind to cause trouble for Bailey Hongzhuang in the future. Master, leave it to us. Xiao He and Xiao Bai said in unison. These loathsome fellows were about to disappear from their sight. Chapter 1427. Bailey Hongzhuang took out a bag of needles from her Qiankuan bag. Even though Mo Yunjue's back injury was very serious, she was still able to accurately pinpoint the location of his acupuncture point. This injury was very serious and she needed to stimulate the acupuncture point. On one hand, it would allow Mo Yunjue's injury to heal faster, and on the other hand, it would prevent the injury from worsening. When the surrounding cultivators saw Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly take out a few silver needles, their eyes filled with suspicion. They didn't know what Bailey Hongzhuang was trying to do. When Mo Yunjue saw the silver needles in Bailey Hongzhuang's hand, his handsome face broke into a faint smile. Thinking back to when Bailey Hongzhuang had first used the silver needles to cure his poison, he didn't understand. But now, he finally understood. Speaking of which, Bailey Hongzhuang was the first and only person who had used the silver needles to treat him. However, he was full of admiration for Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills. Back then, when his injury was so serious and he thought that he was going to die, Bailey Hongzhuang was actually able to pull him back from the gates of hell. This medical skill was really amazing. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was treating Mo Yunjue's injuries, Dong Hongyun and the rest had already slowly walked over to Bailey Hongzhuang and Mo Yunjue's side. Seeing Dong Hongyun and the rest, Bailey Hongzhuang's phoenix eyes narrowed and her charming face was filled with vigilance and coldness. Mo Yunjue's gaze also fell onto Dong Hongyun and the rest. If Dong Hongyun and the rest had any ill intentions, he would definitely attack at the first moment. Noticing Bailey Hongzhuang and Mo Yunjue's expressions, Dong Hongyun's face immediately revealed a fawning smile. Miss Bailey, young Master Mo, previously I had eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I shouldn't have gone against you. I hope that you can be magnanimous and forgive us for our previous mistake. Dong Hongyun's smile was flattering. What a joke, Bailey Hongzhuang was Tiangang Sek's young master's wife. Even if he was given 100 guts, he wouldn't dare to go against her. Otherwise, once the assessment competition was out, he would only have a dead end. Now, he only hoped that Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't bear a grudge against him for his previous actions. Only in this way would he be able to achieve something in the future. Seeing Dong Hongyun's attitude had a 180-degree change. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes couldn't help but be surprised. Compared to Dong Hongyun's attitude before, this attitude was a completely different person. Was it just because Han Xiling's team lost? Even so, Bailey Hongyun's s, Bailey Hongzhuang's? They Hongzhuang Jianxiu's. They Hongzhuang Yao Hongzhuang. To Hongzhuang to Hong. To Hongzhuang, after participating in the assessment competition for so long, they had never seen Hongzhuang Jianxiu like this. It was too damaging to the dignity of Hongzhuang Jianxiu. However, they didn't object to Hongzhuang Jianxiu's actions. With Hongzhuang Jianxiu's pride, Hongzhuang Jianxiu's and Mo Yunjue's identities were very impressive. They couldn't afford to offend them at all. Mo Yunjue's deep and dark eyes flashed with a touch of understanding. He casually glanced at Dong Hongyun and then shifted his gaze. He didn't care about a guy like Dong Hongyun. As for the so-called apology, he couldn't be bothered to pay attention to it. After seeing Mo Yunjue's nonchalant attitude, Dong Hongyun's expression became a little awkward. He could only place his hopes on Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 1428. At this point, Dong Hongyun had already let go of all his self-esteem. The law of survival in the Shengxian continent was the survival of the fittest. In front of the strong, all self-esteem and persistence were meaningless. Only survival was the most important. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Dong Hongyun indifferently. In fact, the Qinrun dynasty only had a grudge with the Myriad Cloud dynasty. She had no grudge with them. She only thought that Dong Hongyun had such an attitude because he knew that Mo Yunjue's identity was not simple. Therefore, she did not say anything. After all, she could not make the decision for Mo Yunjue. When the Qinrun dynasty's cultivators saw that Bailey Hongzhuang did not have any reaction, their faces became particularly awkward. They stood there blankly, not knowing what to do. Dong Hongyun's face flashed with a look of struggle. Then, as if he had made a decision, he looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a bright and determined gaze. I will take responsibility for my own actions. This conflict was entirely caused by me. If Miss Bailey is not willing to forgive me, then let me bear all of this alone. Don't implicate my teammates. Dong Hongyun's gaze was firm. In this situation, since he could not be forgiven, then at least he could not implicate his teammate. Seeing Dong Hongyun's attitude, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but have a higher opinion of Dong Hongyun. To be able to make such a decision, this proved that Dong Hongyun was a real man. However, Dong Hongyun seemed to have put the problem on her? Mo Yunjue looked at Dong Hongyun, then said to Bailey Hongzhuang, "What's your decision?" Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang frowned slightly, showing a trace of confusion. "I'll decide." Mo Yunjue nodded slightly. "This is your choice." When the Qinrun dynasty's cultivators saw that Dong Hongyun wanted to bear all of this for them, they immediately objected. "Captain, you can't do this. This is the decision of our entire team. How can you take all of this on yourself?" Dong Hongyun frowned. "Stop arguing. I'll take responsibility for what I said." Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the unity of the Qin-run dynasty, and her eyes were filled with admiration. Although what Dong Hongyun and the others had done before was somewhat despicable, it was not incomprehensible. After all, it was every man for himself. "As long as you don't become enemies with us in the future, I won't find trouble with you." Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was cold. She didn't like to take the initiative to look for trouble, but she had no choice but to deal with some troubles that came to her. Since the cultivators of the Qinrun dynasty regretted their actions, she did not need to be calculative. It wouldn't be easy for a large empire's team to get rid of them completely. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was like the sound of nature in the ears of Dong Hongyun and the others. Dong Hongyun originally thought that he would not be able to escape this calamity in the future, but when he suddenly heard Bailey Hongzhuang's voice, he could not help but be stunned. He looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in astonishment, only suspecting that he had misheard. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was indifferent, and the corner of her lips curled into a faint smile. No matter what, today's battle had really saved them a lot of trouble. Han Shilling had been completely dealt with, and the immortal spiritual herbs had also fallen into their hands. This was a really rich harvest. Chapter 1429. Thank you, Miss Bailey. Dong Hongyun's handsome eyes flashed with a grateful light. Because of Bailey Hongzhuang's words, His mood had risen from hell to heaven. "Thank you, Miss Bailey." The Qinrun dynasty's cultivators spoke out. The previous dissatisfaction with Bailey Hongzhuang had completely disappeared at this moment, leaving only gratitude. When the cultivators present saw the Qinrun dynasty's cultivators suddenly thanking Bailey Hongzhuang, their eyes were filled with doubts. Did I see it wrong? The Qinrun dynasty's cultivators are actually begging Bailey Hongzhuang for mercy? With the strength of the Qinrun dynasty's team, there is no need to beg Bailey Hongzhuang for mercy. What is going on? Bailey Hongzhuang dared to kill Han Xiling. It is very likely that her identity is more powerful than Han Xiling, so the Qinrun dynasty did this. As the crowd continued to discuss, some of the smarter cultivators had already figured out where the problem lay. It seemed that this unknown Tiangang dynasty's cultivator was a very powerful figure and must not be offended. Bailey Hongzhuang's acupuncture was very fast, and with the help of Yuan Li, everything went smoothly. "Okay," Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly, "be careful during this time, try not to touch the wound." Mo Yunjue nodded slightly, took out a black shirt from his Qianquan bag, and put it on again. Xiao He, Xiao Bai, Xia Jiqing, and the others were also not slow. After Bailey Hongzhuang helped Mo Yunjue treat his wound, they also finished dealing with Sun Yangbing and the others and took their Qianquan bags directly. Pan Zimo slowly walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and said, "Miss Bailey, this immortal spirit grass is for you." At this point, he had already given up on the immortal spirit grass. A stalk of immortal spiritual grass allowed him to get acquainted with Tiangang Sect's young sect leader's wife. How fortunate was this! Bailey Hongzhuang's clear and bright eyes were filled with joy as she looked at the immortal herbs that were growing extremely well in front of her. "Thank you." Bailey Hongzhuang received the immortal spiritual herb and placed it in her Qianquan bag. It was rare to see such a treasure. Based on her judgment of this stalk of immortal spiritual grass, its medicinal power should be enough to concoct 2 life-saving pills. This was a great guarantee for cultivators. This should have been Miss Bailey's to begin with. Pan Zimo's face was filled with smiles. Although he did not understand why Bailey Hongzhuang, who was the young sect master's wife, would take part in the assessment, but as long as he could get to know her and leave a good impression, that would be enough. Xia Jiqing and the others handed their Qianquan bags to Bailey Hongzhuang and said, "Boss, the restriction has disappeared, we can move on." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly, her eyes falling on Mo Yunjue. Mo Yunjue's injuries were very serious, and moving too fast was obviously not good for his injuries. When the other cultivators saw that the restriction had dissipated, they all rushed forward. They had no hope for this immortal spiritual grass, but there must be other treasures in front of the ruins. They had to speed up, maybe the treasure would be theirs. Noticing Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze, Mo Yunjue immediately understood Bailey Hongzhuang's thoughts. Chapter 1430. With Mo Yunjue's words falling, Xia Jiqing and the others' faces were also filled with a touch of understanding. "No, let's go together," Bailey Hongzhuang said firmly, not allowing any refusal at all. Mo Yunjue was injured because of her. The person who should have been seriously injured should have been herself. Now how could she leave Mo Yunjue here alone? What's more, there were dangers everywhere in the ruins. Mo Yunjue was alone and seriously injured. It was extremely dangerous. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Xia Jiqing and the others and said, "You go quickly, Mo Yunjue and I will stay behind." "Boss, you said that if we go together. How can we go alone?" Xia Jiqing was the first to express that they were a team and would never be separated. Gong Shaoqing and the others nodded. "Jiqing is right, we go together. The inheritance in the ruins is very precious. Don't miss this opportunity to improve." Bailey Hongzhuang looked serious. Entering the ruins was a rare resource. If they missed it, they would regret it for life. If they could get the inheritance of the master of the ruins, then their path would be completely different. With her current physical condition, even if she went, she would not be able to compete with other cultivators, so it was not a pity to give up. After the fight with Han Shieling, her internal injuries were not light, and it would take a while for her to recover. However, Gong Shaoqing and the others had obviously not been affected by the battle, and they might even get the inheritance. If they missed it like this, it would be a pity. Xiao He and Xiao Bai also understood Bailey Hongzhuang's idea and immediately said, "The master is right, you go quickly." However, Xia Jiqing and the others did not change their attitude because of Bailey Hongzhuang's words and continued, "Boss, don't think so much. We were able to get the treasure in the stone room before, and it was already worth it. Even if we go now, we may not be able to obtain the inheritance. If we leave them here, we will feel uneasy." Yuan Jixin's face was filled with seriousness and persistence. His life was saved by Bailey Hongzhuang. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang, he would have long disappeared from this world. Therefore, no inheritance or treasure was more important to him than Bailey Hongzhuang's kindness. Xia Jiqing and the others nodded. Yuan Jixin is right. Boss, let's move on. Even if there is nothing, it doesn't matter. Seeing everyone's attitude, Bailey Hongzhuang was touched. After thinking for a moment, she nodded. All right then. Bailey Hongzhuang helped Mo Yunjue up. Let's slow down and move forward. If you feel uncomfortable, you must tell me. Mo Yunjue's deep black eyes rippled with a strange luster. The Big Dipper Dynasty's team was truly surprisingly united. I will. Mo Yunjue chuckled. Sometimes, some treasures were not as precious as the friendship of sharing trials and tribulations. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the others set off, the other cultivators had already rushed forward like the wind, and Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were at the bottom. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had indifferent and free smiles on their faces. For them now, friendship was the most important. Chapter 1431. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others moved forward. Because their speed had slowed down, the distance between them and the other cultivators was getting bigger and bigger. In the end, they were the only ones left on the road. In this regard, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. On the contrary, in this empty forest, there was no danger. It was just a group of people, so it was a good experience. Today, we finally solved the big problem of Han Shieling. When I think about it, my mood is not ordinary. Xia Jiqing's face could not hide the excitement. Before, Han Shieling was so arrogant in front of them. Even in Tian Gang sect, he kept finding trouble with them. She was afraid that Han Shieling would never think that he would die in their hands. The Great Elder arranged for Han Shieling to participate in the assessment competition so that he could take advantage of this opportunity to solve me. I don't know how wonderful the Great Elder's expression will be after he finds out that his granddaughter died in the assessment competition. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were filled with a playful light. At first, Han Shieling did not have the intention to participate in the assessment competition, but later he suddenly participated. Thinking about it carefully, one could guess the reason. The Great Elder must be protecting his granddaughter everywhere. Wu Yuexin and the others were so determined to stand by Han Shieling's side. The Great Elder must be the reason. However, the Great Elder must not have thought that Han Shieling would die in the small world. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Dongfang Yu and the others' faces all showed interesting smiles. That old man is not a good person. Now that his wishful thinking has been ruined, I think he will collapse. Xia Jiqing smiled proudly. She hated the Great Elder the most. He knew that Han Shieling had no chance, but he still wanted to help Han Shieling get all of this. She was very clear about how deep the relationship between Boss and Di Baichen was. It was a pity that some people just did not want to see it clearly and caused so much trouble. Hongzhuang, the matter of Han Shieling dying in the small world, the Great Elder will definitely pin it on you. Even if there is no evidence, he will still hate you to the core. You have to be careful. Gong Shaoqing's eyes flashed with wisdom and seriousness. As far as he knew, the great elder only had one granddaughter, Han Shieling. All these years, he had doted on Han Shieling a lot. Once Han Shieling died, the first elder would definitely fall into paranoia and blame Bailey Hongzhuang for all the problems. With first elder's power in Tiangang sect, I'm afraid he'll cause a lot of trouble. Even though Di Beichen was protecting Bailey Hongzhuang, no one knew what the first elder would do. Just from the fact that the first elder arranged for Han Shieling to participate in the assessment competition and wanted to understand Bailey Hongzhuang through the assessment competition, it could be seen how dark the first elder's mind was. As soon as these words came out, the hearts of Xia Jiqing and the others also became heavy. The existence of such an enemy was a troublesome thing after all. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded, her beautiful face showing indifference and calmness. I will be more careful. At this time, Yuan Xiaoman seemed to suddenly think of something and said, We haven't seen Wu Yuexin yet. After Mo Yunjue destroyed Wu Yuexin's cultivation base, they did not pay attention to Wu Yuexin in the process of fighting. Chapter 1432. After Wu Yuexin's dantian was destroyed, she was seriously injured and didn't dare to move. As early as when Bailey Hongzhuang and Han Shieling fought, the battle fluctuations had already affected Wu Yuexin. In the following attack, there was no other possibility for Wu Yuexin to die. What's more, with Wu Yuexin's state, even if she survived, she would only die in this assessment. Yuan Xiaoman, who was originally a little worried, was relieved after hearing Dongfang use words. She chuckled and said, So that's how it is. Wu Yuexin, that disgusting guy, is lucky that she died in the aftermath. Otherwise, I will definitely make her suffer. Xia Jiqing's voice was full of disgust. When she thought of Wu Yuexin's disgusting appearance, she had been thinking about how to torture her so that she would learn the lesson of all this. She didn't expect her to die so easily, which made her feel a little pity. Well, since she's already dead, we don't have to pay attention to it. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. Their biggest trouble in the assessment had been solved, and their mood was a lot more relaxed. Hearing this, Xia Jiqing and the others' faces showed a smile. They had to say that today was really a very happy day. When they thought of the shocked eyes of the cultivators who were clamoring in front of them when they saw their strength suddenly increase, they felt a burst of joy in their hearts. As Bailey Hongzhuang and the others gradually moved forward, a restriction fluctuation in front of them attracted everyone's attention. Taking a closer look, they saw a pale golden restriction rippling like water waves, full of flexibility. Seeing this scene, everyone's faces simultaneously revealed a surprised expression. There was only one restriction in front of them, and the other cultivators had disappeared, so there was only one possibility, to pass through this restriction. Mo Yunjue's eyes condensed on the restriction and said, This should be the place out of the small world. As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes flashed with a light of understanding. This forest was a small world created by the master of the monument. The reason why they were allowed to come to this small world was for the existence of this medicinal field. Everyone could imagine how many precious medicinal herbs were planted in this medicinal field at the beginning, but unfortunately, only one immortal spiritual grass was left in the end. However, the value of this immortal spiritual grass was enough to shock everyone. Let's go. Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. According to her judgment, this layer of restriction was not dangerous, it was just a kind of isolation effect. After passing through this layer of restriction, they would appear in the palace again. Gong Shaoqing took a step forward and directly passed through the restriction. His body was like a wave of water, disappearing as soon as he passed through. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others moved forward, and when they passed through the restriction, they only felt a strange energy fluctuation, and then they stood in another area. Looking at the dazzling scene in front of them again, everyone sighed in their hearts. It seemed that Moses's judgment was right, they were really in a small world was a small world. I don't know what the final inheritance of the master of the monument is. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were filled with curiosity. Although she knew that this inheritance should not be with them, she also wanted to know what kind of inheritance the master who built such a great monument would leave behind. Chapter 1433. Let's go and have a look. Xia Jiqing smiled. Since it was not too late, they could still go and see the excitement. In this situation, they no longer cared about not being able to get the inheritance. As Bailey Hongzhuang and the others gradually approached, a strange scene appeared in front of them. In their line of sight, a very long mirror channel appeared in front of them. The left and right sides of the wall were full of mirrors. Many cultivators stopped in the middle of these two mirrors, not knowing where to go. My God, there are so many mirrors! Xia Jiqing looked at this scene with amazement. She didn't know how many mirrors there were. It was really too surprising. What the hell is this? Even someone as calm as Gong Xiaoqin could not remain calm at this moment. What was the purpose of so many mirrors? This is really spectacular. Yuan Jixin's face was full of shock. Such a spectacular scene could only be seen in the ruins. In the past, he had only heard about how shocking the ruins were, and he had never taken it seriously. Now that he had personally experienced it, he knew that all this was true, and it was even more amazing than the rumors. As Bailey Hongzhuang and the others approached, many cultivators also noticed their appearance, and their mood could be described as extremely complicated. Originally, they thought that after Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were injured, this inheritance was completely out of their reach. Who would have thought that they would be trapped in so many mirrors again? Bailey Hongzhuang looked carefully and found that there was no way out in front of the mirror channel, which meant that the key point was in these mirrors. She just did not know what the purpose of these mirrors was. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were thinking, Pan Zimo had already walked to their side and said, "Bailey Hongzhuang, you are here." Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. "Young Master Pan." Pan Zimo's face was filled with a warm smile. "You have just arrived. You should not know the purpose of this mirror channel. Let me introduce it to you." "Thank you, young Master Pan." Bailey Hongzhuang did not refuse. If someone told them the real purpose of the mirror tunnel, they could save some time. In this mirror tunnel, the two opposite mirrors are almost identical, but only one mirror is real. You can pass through it and obtain the final inheritance. If you fail, then you won't have another chance. Pan Zimo slowly spoke, his handsome face revealing a bit of emotion. Previously, there were already cultivators who tried their luck and successfully entered. There were also cultivators who failed and were quickly ejected after entering. After that, they were unable to enter again. Therefore, you must be careful when you choose. You only have one chance. After listening to Pan Zimo's explanation, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others understood. They did not expect the mirror channel to have such a function. In other words, the final inheritance lies behind this mirror? Dongfang Yu asked. Pan Zimo nodded. That's right. Currently, some cultivators have already entered, so we have to hurry. Thank you, young Master Pan. Bailey Hongzhuang expressed her gratitude. With Pan Zimo's explanation, they finally understood. Pan Zimo's smile remained. Miss Bailey is too polite. Chapter 1434. The assessment set by the master of this monument is really unheard of and unseen. This time it's really an eye-opener. Yuan Xiaoman's pretty face couldn't hide the emotion. All of this seems so magical. This means that if we can't tell which mirror is the real one, even if we blindly guess, there is a 50% chance of getting it right? Xia Jiqing was surprised. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Yes, but everyone doesn't want to lose this opportunity, so they don't dare to blindly guess. This success rate is quite high. If we really can't find it, then we can just blindly guess. Bai Junyu said. Everyone walked to the two mirrors and looked carefully. Everyone found that among all the mirrors, only the two mirrors directly opposite looked exactly the same. The other mirrors would show different patterns on the frame, but they were all a faint golden color, so they all looked the same from a distance. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the two mirrors in front of her. At a glance, the two mirrors were clearly the same. She couldn't see the slightest difference. Master, the master of this monument is too strange. What kind of strange assessment is this? Xiao He couldn't help but complain. It looked left and right in front of the mirror, but it was obviously the same. A mirror was a mirror, what could be different about it? I think the master of this monument particularly likes to find differences. When we opened the stone chamber before, the master of the monument also used this method, and now it's the same method again. It's really strange. Xiao Bai was also helpless. The hobby of the master of this monument was too strange. How could they find out which mirror was the correct one? Bailey Hongzhuang stared at the two mirrors, her ink-black phoenix eyes full of calmness. In this case, being impatient was of no use. This was an extremely meticulous job. The master of the monument is not letting us find differences, but let us find flaws. Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Find flaws? Xiao He and Xiao Bai said at the same time. They looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise, not understanding what she meant by looking for flaws. He set up two mirrors that are almost the same, but he asked us to look for the difference. He wanted us to look for the flaw. No matter how perfect the design was, it was still not the same mirror, so there would definitely be flaws. What we need to do is to find that flaw. Bailey Hongzhuang kept looking at the two mirrors in front of her. She could clearly see her appearance in the mirrors. Moreover, the two mirrors were impeccable in terms of refraction and other aspects. She couldn't find any problems at all. This is simply an unsolvable problem. Other than relying on blind guesses, there is no other way to determine it. That's right. What kind of stupid test is this? It's too taxing on the brain. It has nothing to do with cultivation at all. I really don't understand why the owner of the ruins would come up with such a question. The cultivators who couldn't find any difference between the two mirrors after searching for a long time couldn't help but complain. If it was a test of cultivation and strength, they could still give it a try. Even if they lost, they could accept it wholeheartedly. However, under such circumstances, they would lose inexplicably and wouldn't be willing to accept it. Chapter 1435. At first glance, everything in this mirror looked the same, but after taking a closer look, one would notice something different. As long as one did not miss out on any details, one would definitely be able to find it. Bailey Hongzhuang stared at the two mirrors and fell into deep thought. Compared to the previous wall tiles, it was obviously harder to find the difference in this mirror. However, since the owner of the ruins had set this rule, it proved that there must be a way to break it. Where exactly was it? Bailey Hongzhuang stared at the two mirrors, and there was no other expression on her face. Time passed by minute, second by second. Bailey Hongzhuang was still calm and did not become anxious because of the passage of time. In fact, being able to have the opportunity to participate in this assessment was already much better than what they had imagined. She believed that if they were to blindly guess their way in, they would not be able to obtain the final inheritance. At the same time, some cultivators could no longer hold back. Once they made a choice in this mirror where they could not find any problems, this feeling would really drive them crazy. Some cultivators had already chosen to give up on continuing to search and began to make blind guesses. Since they could not find the difference no matter how they searched, they could only make blind guesses in the end. They might as well make blind guesses now. If they guessed correctly, they would be able to obtain the treasure earlier. Therefore, Xiao He and Xiao Bai noticed that a group of cultivators began to try their luck and walk into the mirror. Speaking of which, the most peculiar thing about this mirror was that if a cultivator walked into the mirror and was correct, the next cultivator might not be correct. Under such blind guesses, some cultivators successfully entered, while some cultivators were ejected out dejectedly. The cultivators who were ejected out were unwilling to leave, so they could only continue to stay in the same place, wanting to know what treasure the other cultivators had obtained. As a group of cultivators began to make blind guesses, the other cultivators also began to make blind guesses. For a moment, the number of cultivators in the mirror passage decreased by a lot. Bailey Hongzhuang turned a deaf ear to everything around her, and all her attention was placed on the mirror. After her continuous research, she found that there was no difference between the two mirrors at all. The next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang slowly stood up. When Xiao He and Xiao Bai saw Bailey Hongzhuang stand up, they immediately jumped onto Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. Did Big Boss already know which mirror to choose? The eyes of Xia Jiqing and the others also fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. In fact, they were also confused. Choose what you want. Bailey Hongzhuang spoke slowly, her clear eyes shining brightly. In fact, she wasn't sure if her idea was right or wrong, but it was the only idea in her mind, so she decided to give it a try. Perhaps there was no difference between the two mirrors at all, and she believed that there was a problem with the mirror. That was the problem with the mirror. She believed that her judgment was not wrong. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang walked directly into the mirror. There was a fluctuation in the mirror, and Bailey Hongzhuang's figure slowly disappeared from everyone's sight. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw the scene in front of her, her eyes couldn't help but be filled with an unspeakable shock. Chapter 1436. Just at first glance it gave people a very shocking feeling. The stairs were not too high, but the width was extremely surprising. The most shocking thing was that on the heaven stairway, there was a large and solemn black coffin that attracted everyone's attention. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't even have time to sigh that her judgment was really right. Her attention had already been attracted by the heaven stairway and the coffin. Could it be the person lying in the coffin is the master of the monument? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but think of this idea. In addition to this possibility, she couldn't think of any other possibility. On the heaven stairway, many cultivators were struggling to walk up the heaven stairway, but so far the highest was only the 50th floor. Bailey Hongzhuang carefully looked at the surrounding situation. In this amazing hall there was only the heaven stairway. Other than that there was nothing else. Therefore, the final inheritance of this monument should be on the heaven stairway. This is really shocking. Xiao Hei's eyes flashed with a shocked light. If you don't see it with your own eyes, you will never really understand the shock. The master of the monument is really a big deal, it's really amazing. Xiao Bai said with emotion. Bailey Hongzhuang turned and glanced behind. Before, she was not sure whether her judgment was correct or not, so she simply told her judgment to Xia Jiqing and the others. She only hoped that Xia Jiqing and the others could understand her judgment from her words and come here. Xia Jiqing and the others had been waiting. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang enter and not come out again, their faces were filled with joy. Boss made the right choice. She successfully went in. Xia Jiqing's face was full of excitement. As long as the boss was not ejected, it meant that the boss's choice was not wrong. It was really worth being happy. The boss is really amazing. This kind of thing that can't be judged at all, the boss can always find the problem. Yuan Xiaoman's eyes flashed with admiration. Bailey Hongzhuang was really the person she admired the most. Every time he made a decision, it was amazing. She didn't understand why boss was so smart. Mo Yunjue's eyes were filled with a smile. He finally understood why the Beast King had chosen Bailey Hongzhuang as his master. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang's perception was simply too amazing. As long as Bailey Hongzhuang was given a certain amount of time, her future achievements would definitely not be bad. The higher one went on the path of cultivation, the higher the requirement for one's comprehension ability. Some powerful martial skills often required extremely high perception to be able to learn them, and Bailey Hongzhuang's current performance had already proven her high perception. Choose what you want, Gong Shaoqing murmured. Before Bailey Hongzhuang walked into the mirror, she had left such a sentence. However, what did this mean? These mirrors should all be the same. There is no difference at all. As long as you firmly choose the mirror you believe in, that mirror is the right choice. Mo Yunjue's deep eyes were filled with wisdom. This was also his previous idea, but before he acted, Bailey Hongzhuang had already begun to act. Now it seemed that their judgment was correct. Chapter 1437. Boss, you can even come up with an answer to this kind of question. That's amazing! Yuan Xiaoman, who was originally very confused, was even more impressed after hearing Mo Yunjue's explanation. This was too amazing. It turned out that the question that the owner of the ruins was facing was simply unsolvable. Then, why are some of the other cultivators able to enter and some unable to? Dongfang Yu frowned. This point seemed to be somewhat inexplicable. Everything depends on the cultivator's own belief. If they doubt themselves too much, then they won't be able to enter. Once he said this, Gong Shaoqing and the others all understood. All their questions were answered at this moment. Let's go in as well. Mo Yunjue's gaze fell upon the mirror. Many cultivators had already entered. If they continued to delay, then there would be nothing left. Everyone nodded and immediately walked towards the mirror that they had each chosen. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked towards the stairway to heaven. However, when she entered the range of the stairway to heaven, her delicate and perfect face could not help but reveal a trace of amazement. This was because from the moment she entered the range of the stairway to heaven, a dense wave of elemental energy had surrounded her. If this wave of elemental energy was more powerful than the elemental energy in the small dimension, then it was about 3 times stronger than normal elemental energy. Originally, she still had some injuries in her body, but now that she was in such a rich elemental energy environment, she felt exceptionally comfortable. The demon summoning scripture had already begun to circulate on its own, absorbing the surrounding elemental energy. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked upwards, and the cultivators above her continued to walk upwards. However, when Bailey Hongzhuang took the second step on the stairway to heaven, she felt a wave of pressure pressing down on her body, making it difficult for her to advance. Seeing this, a trace of suspicion appeared in her ink-black phoenix eyes. She never thought that the stairway to heaven would have such a mysterious problem. It had truly exceeded her expectations. Bailey Hongzhuang looked upwards and discovered that many cultivators were already drenched in sweat. It was extremely difficult for them to even take a step forward. The owner of this ruin is indeed an incredible existence. Just this stairway to heaven alone is already incredible. Bailey Hongzhuang was full of admiration for the owner of the ruins. She had never seen such a stairway before, but she did not know what this stairway was testing. The 100th step didn't seem very high, but from everyone's expression, it was obvious that it was extremely difficult to climb up the 100th step. It was likely that only cultivators who had reached the last step of the celestial stairway would be able to obtain the final inheritance of the master of the ruins. She had seen ancient ruins before, but it was clear that this ancient ruin had given her the deepest shock. Every test of the master of the ruins was extremely special. If one did not have enough comprehension ability, they would not be able to obtain the good treasures inside. Moreover, this ruin didn't have a lot of treasures like other ruins, but each treasure here was very rare. Just this point alone proved that the master of the ruins had high standards and expectations. Everything he left behind was extraordinary. Not only that, but the layout of the ruins also gave people an indescribable feeling of beauty and enjoyment. Master, the stairway to heaven should be more difficult the further you go. It won't be easy to reach the top. Chapter 1438. I'm afraid that the further we go, the greater the pressure will be. It will be extremely difficult to obtain the final inheritance. Xiao Bai sized up the cultivators who were walking at the top. Based on the difficult expressions on the cultivators' faces, she could tell that they were under a lot of pressure. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded, but her expression didn't change because of this. The inheritance of the owner of the ruin is not simple. Whoever can reach the end will have to depend on their own abilities. In comparison, The owner of the ruin had never set a dangerous test for them since the beginning. The final test also depended on their own abilities. If they were not powerful enough, it would be their own problem. Xiao He and Xiao Bai saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was full of fighting spirit, and a look of admiration appeared in their eyes. No matter when or where, their master was always full of fighting spirit. She would never be frightened by the difficulties in front of her. That was what they admired the most. As a cultivator, the most important quality was not to admit defeat easily. Bailey Hongzhuang did not stay any longer and immediately continued to walk up. Every time she climbed a step, the pressure would increase a little. However, the increase was not huge, and it was completely within the cultivator's range of tolerance. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked up one step after another. Her speed was not slow at all. However, when Bailey Hongzhuang reached the 21st step, she suddenly realized that the pressure on the 21st step had increased abruptly. It was much more than the pressure on the first 20 steps. Under such pressure, her body could not help but sink a little. Upon seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang sized up the situation on the stairway again. Only then did she realize that many cultivators had stopped at the same level. After taking a closer look, Bailey Hongzhuang quickly discovered the problem. Most cultivators had stopped at the 20th, 40th, and even 60th step. It seems that the pressure increases every 20 steps, Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. It was easy to determine the situation from the crowd's situation. The increase every 20 steps meant that it would be harder to climb towards the end. The difficulty of reaching the final level was probably extremely shocking. So far, the highest person had reached was the 60th floor. Most of the cultivators were still around the 40th floor. This did not mean that they could not withstand such pressure, but under such pressure, the consumption of their physical strength was extremely shocking. Walking from the first floor to the 40th floor, any cultivator who was not physically strong enough would need to rest. Master, the concentration of elemental energy here has also increased. Xiao Hei's eyes shone brightly. Previously, the 3 times the density of the origin energy was already very shocking. She did not expect that the density of the origin energy would actually reach 4 times the density. This was simply too shocking. Upon hearing Xiao Hei's words, Bailey Hongzhuang finally reacted. Previously, she had focused all her attention on the sudden increase in pressure and did not notice that the density of the elemental energy had increased once again. Could it be that the density of the elemental energy would double after every 20 steps? Bailey Hongzhuang became more and more surprised. If that was really the case, then the situation was too shocking. If that's the case, wouldn't the density of the origin energy at the place where the coffin is at be 7 to 8 times the density? When Xiao Hei said this, he felt that there was a problem with his judgment. Chapter 1439. Not only Xiao Hei, but Bailey Hongzhuang and Xiao Bai also felt that this possibility was too small. 8 times the density of spirit energy, they had never seen it anywhere. It was too amazing. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was about to move forward, a familiar voice came from behind. "Boss!" Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang turned around and saw Xia Jiqing's figure. Not only Xia Jiqing, but Mo Yunjue and the others also came in almost at the same time. Seeing that everyone had come in, Bailey Hongzhuang's beautiful face was also filled with a happy smile. "You are all here." Xia Jiqing nodded slightly and gave a thumbs up to Bailey Hongzhuang. "Boss, you are still the best. Come up quickly." Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled. At the same time, Mo Yunjue and the others' eyes also stayed on the white staircase. Their faces were filled with shock. In fact, no matter who saw such a staircase, they could not help but be shocked because this was an amazing masterpiece. Pan Zimo and Dong Hongfei, who were on the staircase, saw that the entire team of cultivators from the Tiangang dynasty had come in, and their faces could not help but show surprise. Even in their team, only half of the cultivators had managed to make it in. After all, there was a certain probability of this kind of luck, and not everyone's luck could be so good. Under such circumstances, all the cultivators of the Tiangang dynasty could come in, which proved that there was a difference. Pan Zimo and Dong Hongfei thought of the sentence, "Boss, you are great." Xia Jiqing said before. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang found a way to enter? Although they felt that this possibility was too small, with Bailey Hongzhuang's identity as the young lord of the Tiangang sect, everything seemed not impossible. Anyone who could have such a status must have some skills that others could not have. Previously, Bailey Hongzhuang's battle prowess was already very shocking. Now, it seemed that Bailey Hongzhuang's perception was definitely not simple. They had already experienced the difficulties of this mirror before. Not to mention that it was different, the two mirrors looked exactly the same. They even paid attention to every curve of the pattern, but the final result was exactly the same. There was no difference. The most important thing was that if this was really the difference that Bailey Hongzhuang had found, it meant that Bailey Hongzhuang had not only found the difference in one mirror, she had also found the difference in several other mirrors. How was this possible? Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun looked at each other. This was too unbelievable. Under such circumstances, they even forgot about their daily grudges. This was a truly powerful figure. After a short shock, Xia Jiqing and the others began to walk up. After feeling the pressure on their bodies, Mo Yunjue and the others had a strange look on their faces. However, they quickly recovered from their astonishment and continued to head upwards. Bailey Hongzhuang did not continue to move forward after seeing Xia Jiqing and the others coming up. According to her judgment, it was impossible for other cultivators to reach the top of the staircase today. Therefore, they did not need to be too anxious now. Chapter 1440. Xia Jiqing was the first to walk to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. However, when she walked up to the 21st step, she found that the pressure suddenly increased. Even the hand that was originally stretched out to Bailey Hongzhuang seemed to be moving down a little. Why did the pressure suddenly increase so much? Xia Jiqing's face was full of surprise. Under this pressure, she only felt that her body was a lot slower and she was faintly uncomfortable. As Xia Jiqing's voice came out, Gong Shaoqing and the others were also a little mentally prepared, so when they walked up, their bodies did not suddenly press down. According to my judgment, the pressure on the heaven stairway should increase with every 20 steps. I'm afraid it will be very difficult to reach the top, Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but look at the top of the heaven stairway. Originally, when they stood at the bottom of the heaven stairway, they only felt that the 100 steps would not be too difficult for them and that they could walk up with some time. Now it seemed that all of this was not so simple. It would take a lot of time to walk up. Is it possible that there is only one person who can walk up to the 100th step of the heaven stairway? Yuan Xiaoman bent her head to look at the heaven stairway above and asked the doubts in her heart. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. I don't know. We can only try our best to go higher. The power of this layer is richer than the power of the lower 20 step. If we can go higher, the power will be richer. Even if we cultivate there for a while, it will be of great benefit to us. With the voice of Bailey Hongzhuang falling, Xia Jiqing and the others recovered. They also did not notice this point. The power here is about 3 times richer than the outside world. Gong Shaoqing's eyes were full of amazement. With such a rich power, if they could cultivate here for a while, they should be able to break through soon. Then let's go up quickly, Bai Junyu said with a smile. They did not expect the last inheritance left by the master of the monument to be so domineering. This heaven stairway was an extraordinary existence. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes fell on Mo Yunjue's body, revealing a bit of worry and concern. Mo Yunjue, your injury is very serious. This pressure will damage your injury to a certain extent. In my opinion, you might as well find a place where you can withstand the pressure and sit down to cultivate your body. Under such a rich power, your injury recovery will also speed up a bit. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Mo Yunjue nodded slightly and said, I understand. Seeing that Mo Yunjue listened to her words, Bailey Hongzhuang was also relieved. With Mo Yunjue's injuries, it was impossible to recover without half a month's time. As long as they were able to cultivate here, they would be able to cultivate for a few days. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others continued to move forward. As the pressure gradually increased, the energy in everyone's body was squeezed out. The foreheads of the cultivators were covered with sweat. It was obvious that it was very difficult for them to walk. Above them, some of the cultivators had already stopped and started to rest. Some of them cultivated for a period of time before continuing to ascend. Chapter 1441. The wound on Mo Yunjue's back had begun to bleed, and a faint smell of blood filled the air. Bailey Hongzhuang's nose had always been sensitive. After detecting the smell of blood, she immediately looked at Mo Yunjue's back and said, Mo Yunjue, your wound has split open. As soon as these words came out, Xia Jiqing and the others also looked at Mo Yunjue with concern. Mo Yunjue, you should rest here. Mo Yunjue, wait until your injury recovers before you go up. No matter what, your own body is the most important. Everyone looked at Mo Yunjue with concern. As a teammate, Mo Yunjue had long been a part of their team. Although the inheritance was precious, if one's life was gone, then what was the point of it? Mo Yunjue glanced at everyone, then nodded and said, I'll rest here, you can continue up. Seeing that Mo Yunjue had chosen to have a good rest, everyone was relieved. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze still fell on Mo Yunjue's back and said, If you can't bear the pressure on this floor, then cultivate on the next floor. Don't worry. Mo Yunjue nodded slightly and said, Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. The reason why the wound split open is because of the sudden increase in pressure. After I get used to the pressure on this floor, I'll be fine. The heavenly energy here is richer, and my wound will recover faster if I cultivate here. Then be careful, Bailey Hongzhuang said. Immediately afterward, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others continued to walk forward. However, as everyone gradually went up, everyone also felt a burst of exhaustion. Walking under such pressure was too exhausting. When they reached the 50th floor, they already felt that their bodies had no strength and could not continue. Not only the cultivators of the Tiangang dynasty, but the cultivators of the other dynasties were also in the same state. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a bright light. Under such pressure, their physique would gradually improve. This situation was just like the weight training to improve the physical strength. Under such weight for a long time, the strength in the body would gradually be stimulated. As a result, this had great benefits for the cultivator. I can't walk anymore, I want to rest. Xia Jiqing gasped, her face was red, and her body was dripping with sweat. Under such circumstances, every step was extremely difficult. She had already reached her limit by making it this far. Yuan Xiaoman continued to walk up a few more floors before she stopped and sat down on the ground, as if she was paralyzed. This kind of pressure was too exhausting, and she felt that her body was about to fall apart. Gong Xiaoqing and the others persisted for more floors, and finally stopped at the 61st floor. The huge pressure completely crushed their will to continue, and after sitting down, they could no longer stand up. Bailey Hongzhuang also stopped at the 61st floor. Her physical strength allowed her to continue moving forward, but because of the internal injuries she suffered before, if she continued to move forward, her injuries would be affected to a certain extent. At present, the density of the spirit energy on this floor was extremely rich. Everything was as she and Xiao He and Xiao Bai had guessed. Every time they reached the 20th floor, the density of the spirit energy would double. Chapter 1442. Once Bailey Hongzhuang had made her decision, she immediately sat down on the spot and began to meditate. The stairway to heaven was extremely wide, and could accommodate a cultivator to sit down and meditate. It was as if it had been specially prepared for this purpose. Xiao He and Xiao Bai sat on either side of Bailey Hongzhuang. As their master began to cultivate, the two beasts began to cultivate as well. Their cultivation level was now the same as their master's. Since their master was working so hard in her cultivation, they naturally could not fall behind. This was the only way they could become good helpers to their master in the future. When Gong Shaoqing and the others saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had begun to cultivate, they also sat down and began to cultivate as well. Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun continued to ascend. Neither of them was willing to submit to the other, and neither of them was willing to lose to the other in this aspect. Hence, even though the two of them were exhausted, they were still unwilling to give up and force themselves to continue forward. Finally, when they reached the 79th level, the two of them could not help but stop. They could imagine the pressure on the 80th level. However, based on their current physical condition, if they were to rashly ascend to the 80th level, their bodies would be crushed. Even though they were unwilling to submit to the other party, they could not use their bodies as a wager. Once they reached the 80th level and their bodies were injured, it would be even more difficult for them to surpass the other party. Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun panted heavily as they sat down on the ground. When they noticed that Bailey Hongzhuang had stopped at the 61st level and Mo Yunjue had stopped at the 41st level, their eyes filled with astonishment. Why have they stopped so early? Pan Zimo furrowed his brows. Based on Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' powers, they should not have stopped so early. They should have been able to continue ascending. Hearing Pan Zimo's mumbling, Dong Hongyun looked at him mockingly and said, "Lady Bailey and Mo Yunju are both injured. In the face of such pressure, rest is the most important thing." Pan Zimo was shocked. Bailey Hongzhuang's previous performance had been extremely normal. He had almost forgotten that Bailey Hongzhuang was still injured. "I know, I don't need you to tell me." Pan Zimo glared at Dong Hongyun with dissatisfaction. What he was most dissatisfied with was Dong Hongyun's tone. "Idiot." Dong Hongyun glanced at Pan Zimo and immediately turned his gaze away. It was obvious that he did not want to talk to Bailey Hongzhuang anymore. Many cultivators were cultivating as they advanced. However, many cultivators were unable to continue after the 60th level. The more talented and powerful cultivators were stuck at the 80th level. From everyone's performance, it could be seen that after reaching the 80th floor, every floor up was abnormally difficult. It looked like the distance of a single step, but it felt like the distance of an entire world. Many cultivators were unable to advance to the next level after resting for a few days, while some cultivators simply stayed here and cultivated in peace. After all, in this place where origin energy was so abundant, cultivating for a period of time would allow their strength to increase a little more. Such a good cultivation environment was not something that could be found everywhere. No one knew when it would disappear. Therefore, every day that they could make use of was an extra day of cultivation. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw that the cultivators had stopped advancing, she was no longer anxious. Instead, she focused all her attention on healing her injuries. Chapter 1443. 7 days later, Bailey Hongzhuang slowly opened her eyes and exited her closed-door cultivation. Under such rich primary power, her internal injuries had been completely healed. Not only that, the primary power in her body was gradually growing stronger. If she continued to cultivate here, her cultivation base would soon break through to Orange Realm level 6. Gong Shaoqing and the others had already continued to move forward after they had rested. Only she and Mo Yunjue had been cultivating in the same place and had not moved forward. However, just as Bailey Hongzhuang was about to climb up the stairway, suddenly, two familiar figures came into her sight. "Master, isn't that Xianyuan Huan and Bailey Haoxuan?" Following Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze, Xiao He also noticed the existence of Xianyuan Huan and Bailey Haoxuan. She did not expect to see them here. The two of them are really lucky to be able to enter the last stage of the inheritance. Xiaobai could not help but chuckle. Needless to say, with Bailey Haoxuan and Xianyuan Huan's aptitude, It was impossible for them to really see through the mirror's assessment and walk in here. However, to be able to guess correctly proved that the two of them were really lucky. Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at the two of them indifferently and withdrew her gaze. As a small kingdom, Feng Bo country would naturally send cultivators to participate in the assessment competition. Therefore, she did not feel strange about the appearance of Xianyuan Huan and Bailey Haoxuan. On the contrary, this was a very normal thing. All the previous grievances had completely dissipated after she and Mo Yunjue went to Feng Bo country together. Now that she saw them again, she did not feel much. In the future, they would not be anxious anymore. Now they were just strangers. Bailey Haoxuan and Xianyuan Huan also felt Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze. Both of them looked a little embarrassed. However, as Bailey Hongzhuang withdrew her gaze, the two of them were even more disappointed. The more brilliant Bailey Hongzhuang was now, the greater the disappointment in their hearts. Needless to say, Bailey Hongzhuang had no feelings for Xianyuan Huan. Bailey Haoxuan didn't feel anything before, but now that he saw how amazing Bailey Hongzhuang was, he couldn't help but feel regret. If he had a sister like Bailey Hongzhuang, wouldn't his future be limitless? No one in the entire Feng Bo country would dare to bully him. Not only that, as long as Bailey Hongzhuang entered the sect, it would be much easier for him to enter the sect in the future. However, he had ruined everything with his own hand. It was impossible for Bailey Hongzhuang to acknowledge him as her brother. Bailey Hongzhuang turned around and continued to climb upwards. Her body was much stronger than ordinary cultivators due to her previous training, so the pressure on the 60th floor was not a problem for her. Under everyone's gaze, Bailey Hongzhuang walked all the way up from the 61st floor and soon reached the 80th floor. Seeing this scene, everyone couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Isn't this Bailey Hongzhuang's speed too fast? The pressure on the 60th floor is not small, but she walked up so easily. It's too shocking. I guessed that Bailey Hongzhuang would not stop at the 61st floor. She was just healing before. Chapter 1444. Over the past few days, almost all the cultivators had pushed their powers to their limit. Every step forward was extremely difficult. Hence, when they saw how Bailey Hongzhuang had managed to climb so many steps in such a short period of time, their feelings could only be described as envy, jealousy, and hatred. When Bailey Hongzhuang reached the 81st step, she finally understood why everyone had stopped at the 81st step. That was because the pressure on the 81st step had increased significantly. Furthermore, the density of the elemental energy had increased by 10 times. She could feel that with every breath she took, the elemental energy would enter her body along with the air and expel the mottled energy from her body. Xiao He and Xiao Bai were dumbfounded. Previously, the density of the elemental energy had only increased by 6 times. Now it had increased by 10 times. This was simply too shocking. They could only feel that they were bathing in an ocean of elemental energy. Their bodies were completely surrounded by elemental energy, and it was an indescribable comfort. Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun greeted Bailey Hongzhuang when they saw that she had arrived. "Miss Bailey, you're here." Even though the two of them looked very calm, it was undeniable that Bailey Hongzhuang's speed had shocked them. In comparison, this stairway of heaven tested the cultivator's cultivation to a certain extent. It also tested the cultivator's physique even more. Even as men, they felt that every step they took was extremely difficult when faced with this kind of pressure. What more a beautiful lady like Bailey Hongzhuang? However, Bailey Hongzhuang's calm demeanor proved that she did not find it difficult to accept this kind of pressure. Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun's admiration for her deepened at the thought of this. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded gently as her pretty face rippled with a smile. "I never thought that the density of the elemental energy on the 80th step would be so high. It's simply amazing." Pan Zimo chuckled. "It's because the density of the elemental energy is so high that many cultivators have had a breakthrough in the past few days. The smile on the corners of Bailey Hongzhuang's lips widened. Even though she had been in closed-door cultivation, she could feel the cultivators around her breaking through. The stairway to heaven was indeed a good place to cultivate. Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun were currently standing on the 90th floor. After reaching this floor, they realized that it was extremely difficult to take another step forward. In the span of a day, they had already tried several times, but to no avail. Just the pressure of the 90th level was enough to make them unable to stand up straight. It was as if they were being pressed down by a mountain. Even the circulation of their origin energy had slowed down. Even though the origin energy here was extremely dense, because the circulation speed of the origin energy within their bodies was very slow, they didn't absorb much, and it wasn't as fast as the origin energy they absorbed at the 81st level. There were still a few floors between Bailey Hongzhuang and Pan Zimo. Gong Xiaoqing and the rest also stopped at the 80th floor. It was only after reaching this place that the difficulty began to show. Only those who were orange level and above could reach the 80th floor. As for how far they could go, it would depend on their physical fitness and perseverance. Chapter 1445. Under such circumstances, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu did not try to move forward. Instead, they sat down and cultivated in seclusion. With the Yuan Li in their body, coupled with the rich Yuan Li around them, they believed that they would be able to break through to Orange Realm Rank 1 in a few days. From the moment they set foot on the 81st floor, everyone set their sights on the coffin at the top. Although there had not been any hints since they entered the ruins, they all knew that the final inheritance was at the coffin at the top. As long as they did not reach the top, they would not know what the final inheritance of the ruins was. Therefore, there was no difference between the 81st floor and the 99th floor. Only when they reached the 100th floor would there be a huge difference. However, the further they went, the more difficult it was. Even with Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun's strength, they were still stuck on the 90th floor and could not move forward. Looking at the cultivators present, Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun were the ones who walked the highest. In the face of such huge pressure, everyone even had a guess in their hearts. Maybe none of them would be able to get the final inheritance, because this test was really too difficult. In fact, such a thing had happened in the history of the ruins. The reason why the owner of the ruins built the ruins was to find an excellent inheritor. If he did not find an excellent inheritor, the owner of the ruins would not casually give his most precious inheritance to a cultivator who was not good enough. Now everyone could not help but sigh. It was very likely that no one would be able to get the inheritance in the end. Because the owner of the ruins was not a simple person, the requirements for the inheritor he was looking for would be very high. At the 80th floor, it seemed that they were not far from the 100th floor. However, only when they reached here did they understand how far the distance was. Bailey Hongzhuang originally wanted to talk to Pan Zimo and Xia Jiqing. Suddenly, the Yuan Li in her body surged. It was obvious that she was about to break through. After discovering this, Bailey Hongzhuang did not speak anymore. She immediately sat down cross-legged and cultivated in seclusion. Pan Zimo and the others saw Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly sit down in the middle of her words, their eyes filled with doubt. However, when they felt the surrounding yuanqi continuously pouring into Bailey Hongzhuang's body, they understood what was going on. It turned out that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to break through. Bailey Hongzhuang circulated the devil summoning scripture, and the surrounding elemental energy was continuously absorbed into her body, strengthening the elemental energy in her meridians. The origin energy was not immediately absorbed into Bailey Hongzhuang's dantian. Instead, it was gradually refined by the circulation of the demon summoning scripture. After the impurities were refined, only the purest origin energy was left. Only then did it flow into Bailey Hongzhuang's dantian. In fact, the essence energy on this stairway was much purer than the essence energy in the outside world. Many cultivators could directly absorb it. However, the devil summoning scripture had a higher requirement for Yuan Qi. Therefore, when Bailey Hongzhuang cultivated, her Yuan Qi would increase at a slower rate than other cultivators. If other cultivators could see Bailey Hongzhuang's body, they would realize that the elemental energy in Bailey Hongzhuang's dantian was much purer than theirs. Chapter 1446. Bailey Hongzhuang, who had experience in cultivation in her previous life, knew how important it was to have pure elemental energy. Cultivators of the same level would have different combat powers. On one hand, it was because of the cultivation method and martial technique. On the other hand, it was also related to the purity of the elemental energy. Therefore, she did not blindly absorb elemental energy during cultivation. Instead, she patiently removed the impurities in the elemental energy before absorbing it. This was the only way to stabilize the foundation and allow the cultivator to go further. However, Bailey Hongzhuang realized that the demon summoning scripture had a high requirement for elemental energy. When she was cultivating the demon summoning scripture, it would automatically remove the impurities in the elemental energy. This saved her a lot of trouble. Once the impurities in the elemental energy were removed, this meant that Bailey Hongzhuang needed more elemental energy than normal people to break through. When Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to break through, they did not feel anything. After all, many of the cultivators present had already broken through. Even for them, under such dense origin energy, the cultivation in their bodies was constantly increasing. It was likely that the next breakthrough would not be too far away. However, when they saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was continuously absorbing elemental energy, their gazes gradually changed. As the attractive force from Bailey Hongzhuang's body grew stronger, the surrounding elemental energy continuously flowed into Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Lady Bailey should be breaking through from Orange Level 5 to Orange Level 6. However, the ripples caused by this breakthrough seemed to be stronger than normal breakthroughs. Pan Zimo stared at the elemental energy that was continuously flowing into Bailey Hongzhuang's body. His eyes were filled with doubt and amazement. This ripple is indeed stronger than a normal cultivator's breakthrough. However, with Lady Bailey's status, this situation is not strange. Dong Hongyun quickly understood the crux of the matter and immediately said, as everyone knew, the more elemental energy one needed to break through, the more elemental energy one had stored in one's body. This meant that one's potential was even greater. With Bailey Hongzhuang's status, it was normal for her to have great potential, which one of the outstanding young cultivators of the Shengxian continent was not a peerless talent. Although they boasted of being geniuses, in front of Tiangang Sek's young master's wife, they simply had no possibility of being compared. But if Dong Hongyun and Qin Shi found out that Bailey Hongzhuang was only a cultivator from a small dynasty, I wonder what sort of expression they would have. As Bailey Hongzhuang got closer and closer to the breakthrough, everyone realized that Bailey Hongzhuang's momentum was becoming more and more frightening. The dense elemental energy rushed towards Bailey Hongzhuang like a storm. Finally, it formed a funnel above Bailey Hongzhuang's head and poured into Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Seeing this scene, the cultivators present were completely dumbfounded. Oh my God, isn't the commotion caused by Bailey Hongzhuang's breakthrough too frightening? I've been a cultivator for so long, but I've never seen a cultivator who could cause such a huge commotion during a breakthrough. How much elemental energy does she need to do this? With so much elemental energy pouring into her body, isn't she afraid that her meridians will explode? This doesn't look like the commotion caused by breaking through to Orange Level 5. What's going on? Chapter 1447. Yuan Xiaoman's mouth turned into an O shape when she saw this scene. She knew that Big Brother had always been very extraordinary, but this situation was too abnormal. Thinking of this, Yuan Xiaoman couldn't help but pat Dongfang Yu on the shoulder and say, Dongfang, is Big Brother always so abnormal when he breaks through? Hearing this, Dongfang Yu shook his head with a blank expression. I don't know either. In the past, when Hong Zhuang broke through, he didn't pay too much attention to it. When Hong Zhuang broke through last time, he was also breaking through. He had always been focused on his own breakthrough, so he didn't pay attention to the situation at all. Speaking of which, today was the first time he really saw Hong Zhuang break through. However, the situation of this breakthrough was really shocking. Every time Hong Zhuang does something amazing, it's very shocking. Gong Shaoqing looked at Bailey Hongzhuang, who was enveloped in Yuanli, and his voice was indifferent and filled with emotion. In fact, from the time they met Hong Zhuang until now, Hong Zhuang had done countless things that surprised them. Although the scene before them was unbelievable, this was Hong Zhuang's amazing point. Yuan Jixin stared blankly at Bailey Hongzhuang. No wonder Bailey Hongzhuang was able to obtain the inheritance of the Bloodground Abyss. He felt that what everyone said was right. Any cultivator who obtained the inheritance of the Bloodground Abyss would become an extraordinary person in the future. Based on Big Brother's current situation, he was destined to be an extraordinary person in the future. While Bailey Hongzhuang was breaking through, Xiao He and Xiao Bai were still sitting beside Bailey Hongzhuang. The two little fellows were constantly absorbing Yuanli. If one looked carefully, one would notice that there were two small cyclones above Xiao He and Xiao Bai's head. However, due to the fact that Bailey Hongzhuang's breakthrough had attracted so much Yuanli that it had almost solidified, no one had noticed the existence of the two small cyclones beside Bailey Hongzhuang. This meant that in everyone's eyes, Bailey Hongzhuang's breakthrough was becoming more and more terrifying. It was almost shocking. My God! It's fortunate that she's on the stairway to heaven. Otherwise, if she were to break through somewhere else, I'm afraid the origin energy in this area wouldn't be enough for her. Back then, I once saw the cultivators of the Tiangang dynasty team break through collectively. At that time, the elemental energy in the entire city was sucked dry. The elemental energy outside the city was also attracted over. Yes, I know that. After they broke through for a few days, the elemental energy in the city didn't completely recover. After such a chat, the name of the Tiangang dynasty was also known by many cultivators. Pan Zimo glanced at Dong Hongyun. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang's identity was not something an ordinary person could compare to, this situation seemed to be too unusual, right? Dong Hongyun was silent for a while. Under such circumstances, he didn't know what to say. In fact, he also felt that Bailey Hongzhuang was too insane. I finally understand why Lady Bailey could unleash such powerful combat power when she's only at Orange Realm level 5. Pan Zimo slowly said. It seemed that not only was Bailey Hongzhuang's combat skills impressive, but her potential was even more impressive. No wonder Han Xiling died at the hands of Bailey Hongzhuang even though his cultivation level was higher than Bailey Hongzhuang's. Chapter 1448. Bailey Hongzhuang, who was in the midst of her breakthrough, had blocked out all information from her surroundings. She knew that there was no danger in her breakthrough here. Previously, there were cultivators who tried to attack other cultivators who were in the midst of their breakthrough here. However, there seemed to be some kind of restriction on the stairway which prevented the man from doing anything. Everyone was very grateful for the consideration that the owner of the ruin had given them today. Since the beginning of the assessment, who had not offended a few opponents along the way. In an environment like the stairway, it was expected that they would break through. Once a cultivator attacked them while they were breaking through, not only would they not be able to improve their cultivation, but they would also be severely injured due to the failure of their breakthrough. However, the cultivators did not want to give up on the opportunity to break through just like that. It was extremely difficult to break through normally. Now that they finally had a chance to improve their cultivation, they did not know when the next opportunity would come if they missed it. Bailey Hongzhuang did not know that everyone had already listed her as a crazy person when she was breaking through. She only felt that breaking through on the stairway was exceptionally satisfying. Normally, she would not have so much primary energy when she was breaking through. In this place where the primary energy was so abundant, she could use this opportunity to refine the primary energy in her body even more. However, during the process of breaking through, she could also feel Xiao He and Xiao Bai's breakthrough. Although Xiao He and Xiao Bai did not form a contract with her, she could sense Xiao He and Xiao Bai telepathically. Therefore, when the two beasts were breaking through, she could also feel it in her heart. Boom! Crack! Bailey Hongzhuang could only feel the circulating primary energy in her meridians entering her dantian. At the same time, the sound of a barrier breaking was heard. She had successfully broken through to Orange Realm Level 6. However, after breaking through, Bailey Hongzhuang did not stop cultivating immediately. Instead, she continued to refine the primary energy in the air and used it to stabilize her Orange Realm Level 6 cultivation. However, in the process of stabilizing her cultivation, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly realized that a 7-colored light had quietly appeared in her dantian. The rainbow-colored light was like a fish swimming in her dantian. She carefully sensed it and found that the rainbow-colored light was not harmful to her dantian. On the contrary, she could feel that the elemental energy enveloped by the rainbow light was much stronger than other elemental energies. What is this? Bailey Hongzhuang was flabbergasted. She had cultivated for so many years, but she had never seen 7-colored energy appear in her dantian. Furthermore, she hadn't come into contact with anything strange before this. Logically speaking, this shouldn't have happened. Suddenly, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up as a possibility appeared in her mind. Could it be the rainbow dantian? Previously, Di Beichen had told her that the descendants of the Lan family had a mysterious inheritance. Her dantian used to be the rainbow dantian, and there was a rainbow pearl in her dantian. However, the rainbow pearl was taken away by Lan Qinyan and her dantian was completely shattered. Now that this rainbow light had suddenly appeared, could it be related to the rainbow dantian? After thinking about this, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but fall into deep thought. Chapter 1449. The reason why Lan Qingyan's name could resound throughout the entire Shengxian continent at such a young age was obviously related to this rainbow dantian. Everything was just as Bailey Hongzhuang had sensed earlier. The elemental energy with that trace of rainbow light was much stronger than other elemental energies. Could it be that after the rainbow god pearl was taken away, there was still a trace of rainbow energy in her body? Bailey Hongzhuang's mind was constantly thinking, why would the 7-colored energy appear now? She didn't know if her dantian could still become a rainbow dantian after the rainbow god pearl was taken away. Her clear and bright eyes were filled with a trace of helplessness. She didn't know much about the rainbow dantian. She only knew what Di Beichen had told her. As a result, she was unable to deduce anything else at the moment. It seemed that she could only wait until after the assessment competition to find out more. When Bailey Hongzhuang opened her eyes, she found that many cultivators' eyes were on her, revealing a bit of emotion, a bit of surprise, and a bit of disbelief. Facing everyone's gaze, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes couldn't help but be filled with doubt. What happened? Why was everyone looking at her with such a strange gaze? Hongzhuang, the commotion caused by your breakthrough is a bit scary. Dongfang Yu looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with emotion. Because Bailey Hongzhuang's breakthrough caused too much of a commotion, many cultivators were looking at her until her breakthrough ended. Fortunately, the elemental energy on this sky stairway was very rich, so the time needed to break through was much shorter than usual. Is there? Bailey Hongzhuang was a little surprised. She knew that she needed more elemental energy than other cultivators when she broke through, but it shouldn't be enough to make everyone reveal such an expression. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Yuan Xiaoman, Yuan Jixin, Gong Xiaoqing, and even Dongfang Yu nodded together and said, yes. Upon seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang was slightly stunned. However, when her gaze fell on Xiao He and Xiao Bai, she immediately understood what was going on. She wasn't the only one who was breaking through just now. The other two beasts were also breaking through. She was afraid that everyone would think that she was the only one who caused this commotion. Speaking of which, if a cultivator were to cause such a commotion while breaking through, the commotion would indeed be shocking. I see. Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled. Her face, which was already beautiful enough to topple a city, was now even more charming. Xiao He and Xiao Bai winked at Bailey Hongzhuang. It seemed that their master would have to take the blame for them this time. Bailey Hongzhuang's original injuries were no longer affected by this breakthrough. Bailey Hongzhuang only felt that her whole body was refreshed and very comfortable. I'll continue to walk up, Bailey Hongzhuang said. She could still bear the current pressure. In her opinion, this was a good opportunity to cultivate her body's strength. She definitely couldn't miss it. Everyone nodded. They were already stuck at their current level. It was extremely difficult for them to take another step forward. They could only hope that Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to progress further. However, just as Bailey Hongzhuang was about to walk up, another attractive force came from behind her. Chapter 1450. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others all had smiles on their faces. The final inheritance of the ruin's owner was really too helpful to them. Regardless of whether they could reach the 100th floor or not, just the increase in their cultivation here was already a great thing. Everyone will make breakthroughs one after another. When we leave the ruins, our team's strength will increase by quite a bit. Gong Xiaoqing's eyes were filled with joy. When they first came to the small world, their strength was only comparable to that of a small empire's team. But along the way, their strength continued to increase, and the number of people in their team gradually increased. Under such circumstances, their strength was about to surpass that of a middle-sized empire's team. Their team's battle strength was very strong because of the existence of Hong Zhuang and Mo Yunju. However, their strength wasn't very strong. Until now, they were only comparable to a middle-sized empire's team. No matter what, being able to increase their cultivation meant that they could make more contributions to the team. Dongfang Yu chuckled. Yes, this time's ruins really gave us a big surprise. Originally, they thought that it would be extremely difficult to obtain a treasure among so many competitors. But along the way, their luck was really good. When he thought of this, Dongfang Yu's gaze couldn't help but fall on Bailey Hongzhuang. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang finding a way to break it, they probably wouldn't have obtained anything. Speaking of which, they were most fortunate to be in the same team as Bailey Hongzhuang. Everyone, do your best. If we cultivate here for one more day, our cultivation speed will be faster than usual. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a light and moving smile. Her gaze slowly fell on the coffin on the 100th floor. After seeing everything in front of her, she had an indescribable admiration and worship for the ruin's owner. Just this stairway to heaven was already an exceptionally precious treasure. The ruin's owner was able to give them the opportunity to cultivate on this stairway to heaven. This meant that he was giving them all a precious gift. Bailey Hongzhuang held a trace of reverence in her heart as she continued to move forward. She didn't walk up several steps in a row. She only rested for a moment after climbing up a flight of stairs. After her body had adapted to the pressure, she continued to climb up. Pressure was very beneficial for increasing one's strength. But if the speed was too fast, the body couldn't adapt and this could cause some hidden injuries. As a cultivator, injuries were common. Therefore, many cultivators didn't pay too much attention to it, resulting in hidden injuries in their bodies. Once a hidden injury was present in the body, it would affect the cultivator's future growth. As a doctor, Bailey Hongzhuang was very familiar with this kind of situation. Therefore, she definitely wouldn't allow such a thing to happen to her. The same level. The same. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's speed, Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun were really envious. After 3 whole days, the two of them were still stuck on the 90th floor, unable to move. This was because the pressure on the 91st floor would suddenly increase. Chapter 1451. Miss Bailey, you're really amazing. Pan Zimo looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with eyes full of amazement. It had to be said that with Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation, she was really amazing to be able to reach level 90. Their cultivation was higher than Bailey Hongzhuang, but they could only reach this far. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and did not say anything. Nowadays, cultivators only focused on their cultivation. Very few cultivators focused on their physical strength. Therefore, it was normal for them to be blind. Miss Bailey, the pressure on level 91 will increase again. It's better not to try if you're not fully prepared. Dong Hongyun kindly reminded her. Bailey Hongzhuang chose to forgive him. He was already very grateful to Bailey Hongzhuang. Therefore, he was not the least bit dissatisfied with Bailey Hongzhuang. Instead, he was full of respect for her. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and said, "Thank you for the reminder. I'll take note." Just by looking at Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun, who had not advanced for the past few days, she already knew that the pressure on level 90 was not small. The pressure now was already so strong that she could barely stand straight. If the pressure suddenly increased, it would be extremely difficult. Thinking of this, Bailey Hongzhuang also sat down cross-legged and used the demon summoning scripture to continuously let her body get used to the existence of the pressure. The reason why human cultivators could have the ability to seize the heavens was because humans had a wonderful adaptability. In the process of the pressure slowly increasing, the human body would continuously adapt to the pressure, and thus accept the higher intensity of the pressure. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang start to cultivate, Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun also continued to cultivate. Although they had not given up in their hearts, they had to admit that it was not possible for them to reach level 100. To Bailey Hongzhuang, she only felt that it was an extremely good thing to be able to cultivate in a place with such abundant origin energy. As for whether or not she could reach level 100, she would definitely do her best. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang working so hard in her closed-door cultivation, Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun also started to cultivate. If they really could not reach level 100, they would have to work hard to cultivate here for a period of time. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was cultivating, Mo Yunjue, who had stopped at level 41, also started to move. After nearly 10 days of recuperation, the injuries on his back had basically recovered. This was all thanks to Bailey Hongzhuang's acupuncture. Or else, his injuries would not have healed so quickly. In the next moment, Mo Yunjue started to move. Level 50. 60 level 60 level 70 level 70 level 80 level 80 level. At first, when Mo Yunjue walked up, no one paid much attention to him. After all, other than Mo Yunjue, there were not many cultivators who stopped at level 41. Everyone knew that Mo Yunjue was injured, which was why he stopped at level 41. However, now that they saw Mo Yunjue walking to level 80 at such a fast speed without any signs of stopping, they could not help but feel surprised. They did not expect the cultivators of Tiangang dynasty to be so powerful. Bailey Hongzhuang's performance was already very shocking. Who would have thought that Mo Yunjue's performance was also so shocking? A middle-sized dynasty team, this was really too abnormal. Chapter 1452. Young Master Mo, have you recovered from your injuries? Yuan Xiaoman looked at Mo Yunjue with concern. From the time Mo Yunjue was injured until now, it had to be said that Mo Yunjue's perseverance was very amazing. At least, Mo Yunjue was a real man. Mo Yunjue's handsome face was full of smiles as he nodded slightly and said, "I'm fine now." "That's great," Yuan Xiaoman praised. "Young Master Mo, your injuries are recovering really fast." Dongfang Yu looked at Mo Yunjue in amazement. How serious were Mo Yunjue's injuries before? He thought that it would be impossible for him to recover without half a month's time, but now, it had only been 10 days and Mo Yunjue had already recovered to his original state. It could only be said that his recovery ability was very amazing. In the past, I suffered a lot of injuries, so slowly my injuries recovered faster than usual. Mo Yunjue's voice was indifferent and calm, but when these words fell into the ears of Gong Shaoqing and the others, they had a different feeling. Previously, when they saw the scars on Mo Yunjue's body, they couldn't help but be shocked. With such injuries, they almost didn't dare to imagine how many battles Mo Yunjue had to go through to leave such scars. Even if Mo Yunjue said it so casually, they understood that it wasn't so simple. Mo Yunjue glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang above, then said to Gong Shaoqing and the others, "I'll go up first." Hearing this, Yuan Xiaoman couldn't help but be surprised and said, "Young Master Mo, you have to pay attention to your injuries. The pressure up there will be even greater." "Don't worry, I know what to do." As soon as his voice fell, Mo Yunjue didn't stay and immediately continued to climb up. When the crowd saw that Mo Yunjue was still able to continue climbing, their hearts were filled with admiration and emotion, but more importantly, they were speechless. Mo Yunjue had only just recovered from his injuries, but he was already full of energy and vigor. How could they, who had worked so hard for so long but still remained in the same place? Bailey Hongzhuang, who was in the middle of cultivating, suddenly felt a familiar aura approaching. She could not help but stop cultivating. After seeing Mo Yunjue reach the 85th floor so quickly, Bailey Hongzhuang also had a hint of surprise in her eyes. Sensing Bailey Hongzhuang's astonished gaze, the smile in Mo Yunjue's eyes deepened. He sped up and quickly approached Bailey Hongzhuang. After Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun saw Mo Yunjue's abnormal speed, the two of them were speechless. First, they were stimulated by Bailey Hongzhuang, and now they were stimulated by Mo Yunjue. This blow was really not small. However, Pan Zimo knew Mo Yunjue's identity. With Mo Yunjue's abnormal strength, this kind of thing was definitely not difficult for him. Compared to Pan Zimo's calmness, Dong Hongyun was extremely surprised. Bailey Hongzhuang's identity was extraordinary, so it was normal for her to be able to reach this step. However, Mo Yunjue went all the way from the 40th floor to the 80th floor. The pressure on his body was extremely terrifying. This kind of shock was even more shocking than the shock brought by Bailey Hongzhuang. What kind of people were these cultivators from the Tiangang dynasty? Bailey Hongzhuang and Mo Yunjue were actually so powerful. Bailey Hongzhuang frowned slightly, her clear eyes filled with worry. Mo Yunjue, your injuries can't take this kind of pressure.